She spent 3 years living in a freezing basement, writing every line of code to make her boyfriend a tech billionaire. But the morning their multi-million-dollar company went public, she overheard him laughing with his secretary about firing his useful idiot. What he didn't know was that every single line of their core technology was secretly locked under her personal federal patent. When she walked into the executive boardroom with two federal marshals, his arrogant smile instantly turned to absolute terror. Have you ever wondered what it feels like when you pour every single drop of your youth, your savings, and your unshakable faith into building a giant from the ground up, only to be tossed out like useless trash the moment the crown is finally won? Imagine a damp, chilly autumn evening in a cramped, cluttered basement apartment located in the industrial outskirts of Seattle. Outside, heavy droplets of rain slide relentlessly down the small barred window, blurring the neon lights of the passing traffic into smeared streaks of red and yellow. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of cheap instant coffee, overheated circuit boards, and the relentless hum of three overworked server towers stacked haphazardly in the corner. At a scratched wooden desk sits a young woman, her fingers flying across a mechanical keyboard with fierce rhythmic precision. Her name is Diana. She is a brilliant systems architect and back-end developer who traded a promising career at a major tech corporation to live in this basement, surviving on ramen noodles and blind devotion. Diana didn't care about the lack of comfort or the absence of luxury. Her entire world was anchored to the man sitting beside her, slumped over a monitor with dark circles under his eyes. Arthur Vance. When Diana had met Arthur 3 years earlier at a local university coding hackathon, he was just an ambitious, struggling programmer with a head full of wild ideas and zero financial backing. He possessed a desperate magnetic charm that instantly drew Diana in. He talked passionately about revolutionizing cloud security infrastructure and creating an AI-driven data encryption algorithm that would change the tech world forever. Diana fell in love with his vision instantly. Believing in his raw genius with every fiber of her being, she became not just his partner, but his co-creator, chief engineer, and financial lifeline. When Arthur's car broke down, Diana used her personal savings to buy him high-end hardware. When they couldn't afford rent, she took on 3 freelance coding gigs by day while rewriting Arthur's buggy codebase by night. She spent countless sleepless weekends drafting technical specifications, organizing server architectures, and legally registering their initial startup entity, Vance Tech Solutions. Arthur would often wrap his arms around her from behind, while she coded until dawn, burying his face in her hair and whispering words that felt like absolute truth. Diana, my love, I swear to you, the day this company makes its first million, I will put the whole world at your feet. We are building this empire together. You are the architect of my soul and my success. Diana believed him blindly. She trusted his smile, his warm embrace, and his solemn oaths of eternal gratitude. 2 years later, the basement gave way to a sleek, glass-walled corporate penthouse on the 35th floor of downtown Seattle's most prestigious tech tower. Arthur's encryption algorithm exploded across the global market, catching the eye of Silicon Valley venture capitalists and securing a massive multi-million-dollar buyout from a global tech conglomerate. Vance Tech Solutions skyrocketed overnight into a multi-million-dollar empire, and Arthur Vance became the golden boy of the tech industry, featured on the glossy covers of business magazines. Diana stood quietly in the background, proud of the giant they had created together, waiting for the life they had promised each other. She just had no idea that the moment Arthur reached the top of the mountain, he would decide he no longer needed the person who pushed him up the slope. For the first few months after Vance Tech Solutions moved into its gleaming, glass-walled headquarters on the 35th floor, Diana believed they were stepping into the golden age of their lives. Arthur was featured in tech journals as a self-made prodigy, praising his own relentless drive and visionary genius. Diana, perfectly content to remain behind the scenes, where she felt most at home, continued leading the core back-end engineering team, optimizing the software architecture that kept their multi-million-dollar valuation soaring. She didn't care about the fame, the magazine covers, or the flashing cameras. She cared about the code, the empire they had built with their own hands, and the quiet, comforting belief that her sacrifices had been worth it. However, as the company's capital reserves swelled into tens of millions, subtle, deeply unsettling shifts began to fracture the foundation of their relationship. Arthur stopped staying late at the office to code alongside her. His calendar became permanently packed with executive dinners, board retreats, and high society networking galas. Whenever Diana tried to bring up scheduling a quiet weekend getaway or discussing their long-term personal future, Arthur would flash a smooth, patronizing smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. "Diana, my love," he would say, tapping her cheek with detached condescension as he adjusted his custom silk tie. "You're a brilliant programmer, but corporate optics are a different game. Let me handle the high-level boardroom politics. You just focus on the servers. Don't burden your technical mind with executive stress." Diana swallowed the cold knot in her throat, excusing his growing distance as the natural exhaustion of managing a massive corporate enterprise. She trusted him with the exact blind, unconditional devotion she had shown back in the damp basement. Until a rainy Thursday afternoon in late November, when that blind trust was shattered forever. Diana had returned early from an off-site server migration because her team finished their deployment ahead of schedule. Walking down the plush carpeted executive hallway on the top floor, she approached Arthur's private corner office. The heavy mahogany door was slightly ajar, a narrow strip of warm light falling across the floor. Just as she raised her hand to knock, she heard laughter, a sharp, mocking, intimate sound. It belonged to Jessica, Arthur's 24-year-old executive secretary, a woman recently hired to manage his public calendar, known around the office for her expensive designer wardrobe and sharp, predatory ambition. Freezing in her tracks, Diana lowered her hand and listened through the gap. "Are you seriously still letting her sit down there in the basement-level coding pit?" Jessica's voice purred, dripping with venomous amusement. "Yet the board meetings are next week, Arthur. When are you finally going to clear her out of the company entirely?" Inside the office, Arthur let out a cold, arrogant chuckle, a sound completely devoid of the warmth he once showed Diana in their cramped apartment. "Relax, Jessica." Arthur's voice cut through the quiet room like a razor-sharp scalpel. "Diana is a useful idiot. She built the engine, but she doesn't understand corporate ownership. All the primary administrative equity shares, venture capital contracts, and executive voting rights are registered exclusively under my name and corporate holding entities. She has zero formal equity." Jessica laughed softly, a metallic, victorious sound. "And if she realizes she built a multi-million-dollar empire and got left with nothing? What can she do?" Arthur scoffed dismissively. "Sue me. With what money? By tomorrow morning, HR is issuing her formal termination notice for downsizing redundancy, and her access badge will be deactivated before she even reaches her desk. She's served her purpose. Now, it's time for us to enjoy the spoils." Outside in the hallway, the world seemed to tilt violently on its axis. For 3 agonizing seconds, there was a profound, terrifying stillness inside Diana's soul. No tears, no breathless gasps of shock, no sudden urge to burst through the door and scream out her heartbreak. The raw, searing pain of the betrayal burned so hot and fast that it instantly cauterized every vulnerable emotion within her. When she opened her eyes again, they weren't the eyes of the devoted, trusting programmer who had sacrificed her youth in a basement. They were cold, razor-sharp, completely devoid of warmth, and radiating an icy, calculating brilliance. A ghost of a smile touched the corners of her lips, a dangerous, terrifying smile. "You think I'm just an employee you can fire, Arthur?" she thought, her mind instantly shifting from heartbreak to tactical warfare. "You forgot who actually wrote the Genesis code, and you completely forgot about the specific patent documents we filed before we ever saw a single dollar." Quietly, silently, Diana turned on her heel. She walked down the long corridor, took the private elevator down to the server room, and slipped her encrypted master drive into her bag. The game was no longer about love. It was about absolute, uncompromised destruction. For the next 5 days, Diana played her role with terrifying, Oscar-winning precision. To Arthur, to the department heads, and to the unsuspecting HR managers, she remained the quiet, diligent back-end engineer, submitting her daily code updates and sitting silently through team meetings. When Arthur walked past her workstation in the open-plan engineering pit, flashing a cold, patronizing smile and asking if her server optimization was coming along, Diana smiled right back, her eyes reflecting the exact submissive compliance he expected to see. Not a single muscle in her face betrayed the Arctic storm raging beneath her skin. While Arthur believed she was completely oblivious to his corporate coup, Diana was waging a silent, lightning-fast war in the absolute shadows. On the evening of her scheduled termination, while Arthur and Jessica were dining at an exclusive rooftop restaurant celebrating their impending victory, Diana was locked inside a secure off-site legal office with one of the country's most ruthless intellectual property and corporate litigation attorneys. Arthur's arrogant assumption that she had zero formal equity was his fatal blind spot. He had looked at modern corporate bylaws and venture capital funding rounds, but he had completely forgotten about the archaic, foundational bedrock upon which VanceTech Solutions was originally born. 3 years earlier, back in that damp basement before a single venture capitalist had ever heard of them, Diana had insisted on drafting and filing the original foundational intellectual property patent for the core data encryption algorithm under her own primary legal name, with Arthur listed merely as a secondary, contributing co-inventor. Furthermore, tucked deep inside the preliminary founders' agreement, a dense 50-page legal document Arthur had blindly signed during their second month together without reading, was an ironclad, unalterable clause. Any commercial exploitation, buyout, or corporate scaling of VanceTech Solutions is legally bound and perpetually tethered to the active, unrevoked co-ownership of the original patent holder. If the primary patent holder revoked their licensing agreement due to executive breach of contract, fraudulent termination, or corporate bad faith, the entire corporate entity, its multi-million-dollar valuation, and all subsidiary assets would be instantly frozen, reverted, and partitioned 50-50 by federal IP mandate. Arthur hadn't just fired his engineer. He had attempted to lock out the legal owner of his entire technological DNA. Her attorney stared at the certified documents in absolute awe. "He thought he built an empire, Diana," her lawyer said, sliding the federal injunction forms across the mahogany desk. "In reality, he built a house of cards on someone else's land." Working through the night, her legal team compiled a devastating airtight federal injunction and a 50% corporate asset partitioning claim. Everything was locked securely in place. The trap was set for the following morning, right during the company's highly anticipated quarterly board meeting on the 35th floor, where Arthur was scheduled to publicly announce his corporate restructuring and his engagement to Jessica. The grand glass-walled boardroom on the 35th floor of VanceTech Solutions hummed with electric high society anticipation. Outside, the panoramic windows offered a breathtaking view of downtown Seattle's glittering skyline, while inside, elite venture capitalists, high-ranking board members, and prominent tech journalists gathered around the massive mahogany conference table. At the head of the table sat Arthur Vance, dressed in an immaculate custom-tailored Italian suit, a platinum watch flashing on his wrist. He looked every bit the triumphant tech mogul. Standing right beside him, draped in an expensive designer dress and wearing a smug, victorious smile, was Jessica, now officially positioned as his executive chief of staff. Arthur tapped his glass with a silver pen, calling for silence as he prepared to deliver his keynote speech, announcing the company's full corporate restructuring, the removal of redundant legacy staff, and his new executive vision. "Ladies and gentlemen," Arthur began, his voice smooth, confident, and dripping with arrogant charm. "Today marks a historic milestone for VanceTech. We have built an unbreakable algorithmic empire from the ground up, proving that true technological genius." He was abruptly cut off. The heavy, soundproof mahogany double doors of the boardroom swung open with a sharp, echoing snap. Absolute silence fell over the room. Walking slowly and deliberately down the center aisle was Diana. She wasn't wearing her usual casual coating hoodie or basement work clothes. She wore a sharp, tailored midnight black business suit that radiated absolute, unshakable authority. Her posture was erect, her expression a mask of chilling, razor-sharp composure. Flanking her on either side were two federal intellectual property marshals holding official court-stamped injunction binders. Arthur's smug smile faltered instantly, his face draining of every drop of color in a single microsecond as a sickly, ghostly gray washed over his skin. Diana? Arthur stammered, his voice cracking slightly before he quickly masked his panic, forcing a condescending laugh as he addressed the board. Security? What is this trespasser doing on the executive floor? She was terminated yesterday for redundancy. Escort her out. Diana did not flinch. She stopped dead 3 paces from the head of the table, her gaze locking onto Arthur with the chilling detachment of an executioner. With a deliberate movement, she reached into her sleek leather portfolio, pulled out a thick, federal court-bound legal dossier stamped with the official seals of the United States District Court, and tossed it casually onto the polished mahogany table, right in front of the lead venture capital investor. There is no need for security, Arthur. Diana's voice cut through the silent boardroom like shattering glass, carrying effortlessly across the entire hall, especially since your investors deserve to know who actually owns the technology they are funding. Jessica stepped forward, her eyes wide with panic. She's lying! She's just a bitter, disgruntled former employee trying to extort the company. Diana turned her cold, unwavering gaze straight onto Jessica, a dangerous, terrifying touch of a smile playing on her lips. No, Jessica. Under the foundational intellectual property patents and the binding co-founder agreements filed before this company ever had an office, every single line of the core encryption algorithm legally belongs to me. Diana looked back at Arthur, whose hands were now trembling violently against the edge of the table. Effective 3 minutes ago, my legal team finalized the federal IP revocation. Your exclusive operational rights are suspended. The multi-million-dollar buyout funds are legally frozen by federal court order, and by statutory right of the primary patent holder, 50% Advanced Tech Solutions equity, assets, and future revenue streams are officially partitioned and transferred to my personal corporate holdings. Arthur lunged forward from his chair, his voice cracking with sheer, unadulterated terror as sweat poured down his temples. Diana, wait, please, we can talk about this. It was a misunderstanding. I never meant. Diana didn't even blink. She looked at him the way a master surgeon looks at a hopeless case ready for discharge. You wanted a basement programmer to build your throne while you played the king, Arthur, she said, her voice ringing with absolute finality. Instead, you built your own gallows. She turned on her heel, the long fabric of her suit jacket sweeping past the conference table as she walked calmly toward the private elevator. Behind her, the venture capitalists were already demanding answers. The flashbulbs of the media were firing frantically, and Arthur collapsed back into his leather chair, utterly shattered amidst the wreckage of his own monumental greed. Diana stepped into the elevator, the heavy doors sliding shut to lock out the past, forever, free, victorious, and the rightful owner of the empire she had built.